But let's jump into some more specifics. So why did we use this? Why did we decide to have an electoral college as opposed to just a majority vote? Well, the simple answer is founding fathers didn't trust the population to pick a qualified candidate. You'll remember that this is a time in history where, hey, a lot of people didn't even know how to read, and a lot of people didn't know that much about politics. So the founding fathers established this system so that instead of like every Joe Blow who has no idea what's going on, they could have like a smaller grouping of specific people that would be representatives, basically, that would be in charge of helping to vote and figure this out. So informed people could choose as opposed to idiots, basically. Um, but also, they were worried that like regional candidates wouldn't represent the entire country. So, of course, this was when the founding fathers established this. This was before the internet. This is before TV. So, if there was a candidate that wanted to run for president from New York, we in California would never hear about this person. We would have no idea who they were. So, when we got all of our ballots to vote, and all of a sudden, like Joe McGee from New York is on there, we would have no idea who this guy even is. But if you bring it down to where there's like smaller numbers for the electoral college, these people can obviously just go to Washington D.C., figure out what's going on, and then be able to make it so you don't have to communicate all of this stuff to every person in the country. Um, but also, they were really worried that there wouldn't really be a clear majority, and would have to run more than one election to make up for that. So they just went ahead and made this system, hoping that it would kind of minimize all of those problems. But here's this. So total number of electors in the U.S., there are 538 electors. You're probably going to want to write this number down because we will be talking about this. So there are 538 electors in all of the states. So once again, each state gets 2 electors for the senators, 1 for each senator, and then all states get 1 for each member of the House of Representatives. But also, the District of Columbia gets 3 because, like, Washington, D.C. isn't really a country, or sorry, isn't really a state, haha. District of Columbia is not a state, but they get 3 also, just so that they can represent kind of like the place where government stuff happens. But everyone else is sort of based on this senator and House of Representatives thing. But it is worth mentioning that the electors themselves are not the senators or the representatives. There's just an equal number of electors to these people, but they are not the senator or the House of Representatives. They're totally different people. So California, we know that we have 55. We saw on all 3 of those maps that we had 55. Again, 2 senators, and we have 53 members of the House of Representatives. So we have 55. So who are these electors? If they're not the senators and they're not the representatives, who are they? Well, simply put, they are party loyalists that are pledged to their party's candidate. So what that means is that the electors themselves are people that are selected by the party to just be electors. So when it comes down to the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, at these conventions, they select who these electors will be. And what that means is that every state will have electors chosen by all of their parties. So that means that in California, there are 55 electors that will be chosen for the Republican Party. There are 55 different electors that are chosen for the Democratic Party. There are also 55 completely separate people, 55 additional electors chosen by the Green Party, 55 more chosen by the Constitution Party, etc. So each party chooses their own electors for each state. And then ultimately what they do is that if California gets a Democratic majority, as they have in the past, then what that means is that the Democratic Party's electors are then allowed to vote. That's sort of what that means. It doesn't mean that there's only 55 for the whole state, and then whatever the majority is forces those electors to have to vote that way. It simply means that whichever party gets the majority vote in each state, their party's chosen electors are the ones that get to cast their vote, which sort of means that, just because they have that a person was selected by the Democratic Party, was given the chance to vote because the Democrats got the majority. It does not guarantee that they will vote for the Democratic Party. We'll take a look at what that means later, but it's potentially sort of screwed up. But again, electors are sort of just average people. They generally are people that work office jobs for a party, or they work for the Democratic or Republican national conventions, but they aren't like mayors or any other elected officials. They're just sort of average citizens. So what do? Of course, they actually cast their vote for the president and the vice president. So in the actual election, when it comes to deciding who the president and vice president is, the electors' votes are the ones that count. The elector votes are the ones that are counted, and those are the ones where the majority ultimately decides on the president and vice president, which means that when the citizens of California go out and vote, and on our ballot we decide to vote for Trump or decide to vote for Hillary, you're not really directly voting for Trump or Hillary. What you are sort of doing is voting for that person's party's electors to have the chance to cast their votes. And so you're really trying to get a majority for a party to allow that party's electors to cast their votes. Pretty indirect, sort of complex, but that's sort of how it works. And when do these electors actually cast their votes? Well, they end up casting them in December, specifically following the election in the state legislature. So the citizens themselves, of course, vote in November, and so this allows the California to do their like state stuff, figure out what the majority is, and then tell the electors. And then in December, they have the opportunity to then go and vote. So how are the electors supposed to vote? Of course, if the Democrats get a majority in California, as they have in the past, then theoretically all of the Democratic Party's chosen electors are supposed to vote for the Democratic Party's nominee, right? That's what they pledged that they would do. But is it possible for them to be a rogue elector and vote for someone totally different? Yes, they can. Because it's not guaranteeing they will vote for a particular thing. It's just guaranteeing that that party's electors get to vote. They promised they would vote for that party, but it is possible for them to vote for someone different. Has this ever happened? Yes. Has it ever changed an election? Not really. In the past, when people have voted against what they had pledged to, usually what it is in some form of like political protest. Like the person that they pledged to, like someone decided, yeah, I want to be a Democratic legislator because this nominee is awesome. And then after they're agreeing to do that, then like there's some scandal and the person that they had agreed to vote for did something stupid and they don't like that person anymore, and in protest they might vote for someone else. That's generally what's happened in the past. Again, it's never really changed the outcome of an election, but theoretically it could. So how is it decided which elector gets to vote? Most states, all the popular vote winner gets all the electoral votes. Again, this is back to that winner-take-all thing. So whatever the majority gets in most states, then the electors from that party get all of them. It's winner-take-all. California's winner-take-all, so whichever party wins gets all 55. It's a bunch, more than any other state, by a pretty significant number, actually. So, if you mean that a candidate can win by a popular vote, but still lose in the Electoral College? Yeah, totally. That's happened a few times, and it means that if the president gets like one more popular vote in a particular state, then they get all the Electoral College votes. So what this can lead to is, let's say that we saw the map. Well, I'm going to jump back to the other maps just to show for an example. But let's see in this election here, imagine that like 49% of people wanted McCain and 51 wanted Obama. Well, then Obama wins the whole state. If in New York, 49% wanted McCain, but 51 wanted Obama, then again it goes all blue. But imagine that if there was just a slight majority, but almost as many people wanted McCain here, and almost as many people wanted Kane here. If we can imagine that, then we could put ourselves in a situation where the majority of people in the United States could want McCain, but set it up where just based on this winner-take-all model, it could be that even though whatever candidate could be most popular by most people, based on the Electoral College, they could still lose the election. It's a pretty nutty system, fairly confusing, and hopefully we'll be taking a look at ways in which we could sort of make that better. That said, every election, there's always third-party candidates, and they're almost never successful. And in part, it's because a lot of people just sort of feel like that they don't want to throw their vote away, right? So that they don't end up voting for that third-party candidate, and because they hardly ever get a majority in any state, they hardly ever get the winner-take-all thing where they get any of the electoral votes. So third-party candidates generally don't really get electoral votes, sort of ever. But can third-party candidates be spoilers? Like, can they affect the way that the election works? Yeah, totally. So in the 2000 election with Bush and Gore, there was a third-party candidate that ended up taking votes away from Al Gore, and making it so that George Bush ended up having the majority votes. That more people in the United States would have preferred Al Gore to George Bush according to the way that the votes went supposedly, but because there was another candidate that was fairly similar to Al Gore, enough people voted for the other candidate that it took some of those electoral votes away from Al Gore and made it so that between Bush and Gore, Bush ended up having more electoral votes. So in that way, third-party candidates can be spoilers. They can upset what the balance of being able to get the American citizens what they might be more interested in actually having. Of course, then there's, of course, the issue of after 9/11, then everybody was much happier with Bush for a while. So, maybe it was fine-ish, who knows? But there was a third-party candidate that sort of had an interesting effect. And so the next question is, what if no candidate ever gets a majority? What if it's so divided among all these third-party candidates that no one ever gets to 270? Well, then what will happen is the election will just move to the House of Representatives, where one state just gets one vote, and then all states just vote for the candidate they want. And then, of course, in this situation, 26 is the majority out of 50, right? So then if they can get 26 states, then great, they can win that way too. Do many people not like the Electoral College? This is sort of like a weird way of saying that question. But yes, most people aren't especially happy with the Electoral College. But why don't they change it? Well, it's in the Constitution, and it's super hard to change the Constitution. But are there ideas for changing it? Yes, there are a bunch, and they're all really interesting and really pretty cool. Here's a link right here, right in this presentation for where you can check those out, but we'll actually be spending some time in class in which you have an opportunity to explore these on your own and see how you feel about these other alternatives and potentially which one you think might be the best solution to this problem. But as for now, that's all we're going to do to talk about the Electoral College, and I say that as though this wasn't a whole bunch of information, but we'll potentially be exploring a little bit more later and kind of how all the process of voting works, but that's it for now.